Welcome to the Comics Arts Conference. It is a little different. I wonder how many of them don't know what the Comics Arts Conference is, but they shared anyway. There's not going to be a Comic-Con. But the Comics Arts Conference is a scholarly conference within the convention. It's founded by Peter Coogan and Randy Duncan over 20 years ago. I've done it regularly here and at WonderCon ever since. And we do scholarly talks. We get a little different insight on some of these things, or Len laughs at the word scholarly. So it's a little different from some of the other panels. We're not going to have the latest scoop on what's going on in Marvel Comics, who's not dead this week. We have t-shirts with the Pacific Ballroom next door at the hotel is where they're selling the t-shirts for the convention. They have the Comics Arts Conference t-shirts, which has a not quite Captain Marvel design, which says punched holes in the canon. But welcome to a serious look at the Joker, known as the Clown Prince of Crime, the Harlequin of Hate, and many other things. I will, beginning at the far end, the man who knows the most about what this topic, where it comes from, a book. Introduce yourselves, tell them who you are, why you're here, what you have to do with the Joker.
My name is Weiner. I am a popular culture librarian at Texas Tech University. I also teach some honors classes related to comics and popular culture, and I'm the co-editor of the Joker book.
Hi, my name is Peaslee. I'm an associate professor and chair of the Department of Journalism and Electronic Media at Texas Tech as well. And I'm also the co-editor of the Joker book. That's both Ryan and our authors as well.
Stephen,
Not loud enough, can you hear me now? Hi, I'm Means-Shannon. I'm an independent scholar. I was an English professor for 10 years, and then I was the editor-in-chief of the website mediated.com, which is a comics journalism website, and currently an editor at Dark Horse Comics. So I moved into being a comics editor, but I contributed to this wonderful book on the subject of how the Joker appears in Arkham Asylum by David McKean and Grant Morrison, which I think is a really important work. And that's about it.
I'm Len Wein. I'm the creator of these characters you mentioned. I'm not sure what I'm doing here. Scholar is not a word attached to my name usually. I edited and wrote Batman for many years, and I did a whole batch of Joker stories. I assume that's why I'm here.
My name is Ryan Litsey. I'm an associate professor at Texas Tech as well. I contributed one of the chapters in the Joker book. I have a background in political philosophy, and so there's a description about the Joker and his relationship to some Nietzschean character in the chapter I wrote. And I covered primarily the video games, Arkham Asylum and Arkham City. I didn't get to the third one, so I did not get my time right. But I also addressed a little bit of sort of the Dark Knight movie. So.
I'll tell you one. Although I didn't work on that book. I'm Travis Langley, professor of psychology at Henderson State University. I did not work on this book. I gave them some feedback. I'm best known as the author of a book called Batman in Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night, in which I analyze Batman and many other characters. And of course, the Joker keeps coming up all throughout that book. Right. You had something you wanted to throw out there? Or...
Oh, I was just going to say your book's awesome.
My what?
Your book is awesome.
Oh, thank you.
That's all. Yeah.
So, why did you do this particular scholarly study of that particular character?
Well, the idea for the book had been, it took us about 8 years from idea to finish. And here's the thing. I was in one of those cheap sort of clothing stores that you go to the sort of factory outlet type places, and I saw these children's socks with the Joker. And it occurred to me, okay, the Joker kills people, lots of people, but he's on socks for children. And it occurred to me that, well, here's a character that's a villain that, you know, very young children to people in their 80s and 90s know who they are. You know, and as Rob and I like to say, there's the big four: Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, and the Joker, that sort of has this worldwide appeal. And it just dawned on me, well, there wasn't a scholarly book about the Joker. Well, maybe I should do it. And I invited Rob, and there you have it.
So in the book, you each contributed different thoughts, different topics to it. So what did you talk about? What did you each have to say about the Joker? Let's start with this end and work our way back then.
Right here.
What did you say in this book about the Joker?
So in my chapter, I described the Joker as Nietzsche's symbol of the ultimate man, the Übermensch. But the real twist is, if the Joker is the Übermensch, that makes Batman a character that Nietzsche calls the last man, or the man of ressentiment. And the man of ressentiment consistently lies to himself. And so in many ways, Batman's sort of a coward in this relationship. And it's the Joker who's truly free in the Batman universe. And Batman sort of consistently denies his own freedom, which makes him kind of a coward. Rob hates when I say that. Probably everyone out here is like, oh no. But because of sort of the psychology, or I don't want to say psychology, because I'm not sure Nietzsche would support that argument either, but because of the structure of the Nietzschean argument, Batman's refusal to sort of understand the Joker's position, and it primarily centers on the killing, will excuse Batman to be Superman for this argument.
It wasn't out yet.
That's right, it doesn't apply. Because he refuses to sort of take that last step, the Joker is uniquely obsessed with sort of freeing him up and getting him to sort of commit to it, and that's where this relationship comes from. That's kind of how I address the Joker in what I wrote. So.
I have very similar thoughts in that respect. What I love about the Joker is that he is the only villain who knows he's a villain and embraces it. He adores being a villain. There's a moment, I think, in The Dark Knight where he says essentially, you know, if I kill you, I win. If you kill me, I win. How do you beat something like that?
And that's actually one of the characteristics of Nietzsche's Übermensch was he calls it amor fati, which is the love of fate, and this idea of eternal recurrence. And so the Joker really just doesn't care because he's lived life to the fullest, so if he had to live it again, he's fine with that. And he accepts his fate, whatever that may be. His real hang-up is that Batman is such a wiener. He really is. Very serious. But now, granted, you know, we can debate that, but in a very serious way, like, commit to the role, man. And Nietzsche actually describes the man of ressentiment as someone who like sneaks around in the shadows and is like lies to people, which Batman lies to himself because he has a split personality, right? He's both Bruce Wayne and Batman. And he sneaks around in the shadows all the time. He hides all the time. He lives in darkness. Both psychologically and probably actually. So.
But that's what makes him cool.
Makes him a prisoner.
Well, aren't we all?
I'm with Len, that's what makes him cool.
Hannah.
Well, my contribution to the book is a study of how the Joker appears if you compare him to all of our traditions in ancient culture up through medieval culture, different cultural traditions. Does he fit an archetype of a devil or a devilish figure? Or does he fit some other type of archetype? Because it's always hard
what's interesting about the Joker is classifying him, because sometimes you kind of like him, and you kind of like what he manages to do. There are definitely stories where he's almost a hero. And then there's stories where you just think he's must be the most vile creature. So I'm trying to figure that out. And my research for that chapter went really overboard. I had so many books on hell and demons, and so many books on every kind of creepy underworld tradition throughout the world. I think my family thought I was going a little nuts, because I had all these books stacked up all the time. And what I found was that the Joker did not match a devil or the devil at all. He might appear that way from a distance, but the closer you got to looking at his appearance throughout tradition in comics, he actually had a really close match, something like 8 out of 10, to be what's known as the king of the underworld. So a Hades figure, someone who rules the underworld. And that explained a lot, because Hades is an ambiguous figure. You don't hate him all the time or love him all the time. You're going to dislike him when he takes someone from you that you love. You're going to make your peace with him when you realize, that this is the way of all things. There's all these things that lined up with the Joker. And what you're saying about Batman is interesting, because in this comparison, if Batman is trying to perceive the Joker as the devil, he's going to be consistently thwarted and frustrated by that, because it's not going to quite work. And the Joker is going to perceive Batman as someone who's making a journey into the underworld to learn something, to gain knowledge and wisdom, and therefore want to embrace him and teach him these things. And Batman's going to instead, revile him and treat him this way. It doesn't totally line up in every way, but it's really interesting that so many different cultural traditions have probably influenced the way we see the Joker now.
Let's think about archetypes. They don't line up perfectly all over until people deliberately try to fit the formula. Carl Jung, a psychiatrist, colleague of Freud's, and they have a falling out, and we're buddies anyway. He noticed these universal themes that you see in stories all over the world. And he felt there was this underlying pattern, this archetype that's inherited in us. Whether he's right about that being the reason we have these universal themes, there are the universal themes. There are these patterns that pop up over and over and over. In my book, when I speculated on what Jung would have had to say, I actually thought I would say more about Jung than Freud. I had one chapter, I'm not a Jungian, I'm not a Freudian, but I find them fascinating. The psychodynamic duo, Freud and Jung on Batman and Robin. And with Batman's own nature, well, it's part of why the Joker is the perfect nemesis for Batman. Batman is different from other heroes. In that relationship, which character looks like the devil? Batman. He has already embraced the shadow archetype, which commonly in stories is put in the role of the villain. So many heroes, their arch nemesis is often themselves dressed in black. How many of you watched Flash? Season 2. One year he's yellow, and then himself dressed in black. And so Batman is already one who's embraced his own dark nature, his own shadow, and he's using his darker qualities to fight for others. So when you get this hero who's already darker, who's already taken the shadow, then his enemies take a different nature. They become these very strange funhouse distortions of him, not just Bizarro, where he's Superman with a bad face. It's the grim-brooding hero who looks like a monster. His ultimate enemy is the bright laughing monster who looks like a clown. And so the Joker has the trickster archetype in there, very obviously, but not as neatly the shadow, because he has to reflect Batman. Or do you have something you want to say on that?
Oh, me, I was going to say, as an editor at Dark Horse Comics, I have the pleasure of editing the delayed but finally soon to be released memoirs of Jerry Robinson, and it's coming out in the spring. So the first artist who worked on the Joker as a character wrote a memoir that before he passed a few years ago, and we finally gotten that together, and with a lot of unpublished original comic art and sketches that will be appearing in the art side of the book. And I don't want to give too much away, but I was so fascinated by hearing Jerry's own words about the physical design and look of the Joker in his first incarnation. And he really wanted him to be totally ambiguous. he said things like, this is the perfect way to present someone who you aren't going to be able to predict what they are going to do or say. It'll have that effect on the reader. And also, he was aware of needing something to balance, like you said, the dark. Already, Batman was dark. Detective Comics 30 Days was pretty dark, a lot of violence. And he just felt like this was the eureka, was to flip the coin and to create a villain that was the opposite of that.
Jerry Robinson, Bob Kane, and Bill Finger had overlapping but not identical accounts of how the Joker came to be.
That's actually how Nietzsche describes Zarathustra as well, as sort of this humorous clown. Yeah, at the very end of the book, he says that the ultimate man would be a comedian.
Sounds like Watchmen.
Okay. What did you do on the book? Your turn.
Well, as co-editor, I worked with Rob to essentially ask for all these great pieces of writing and then kind of go through them and figure out what was going to work and how the different pieces were going to work together. And I don't recall how many pieces we got, but it was far more than we ended up publishing the book. And,
80, I think?
was it that many?
Yeah, I think so.
That's a lot.
60, 80, somewhere.
So what
That's
ideas
why it took so long.
And what ideas of your own were you bringing into this when you were working on it?
Well, so I come to the Joker largely through film. I've been catching up on comics kind of since Rob and I started working together 7 or 8 years ago, but I'm more of a film person generally, so in 09 with The Dark Knight, I started getting really interested in what was particularly resonant or relevant about the character, particularly post 9/11. So when I sat down to work with Rob on the introduction, I was really interested in that question. What makes the Joker so relevant to us, particularly in the West, in a post 9/11 context? And then, as we were actually in the process of writing that piece, Aurora happened, which was a kind of a really unsettling moment to be working on a book about a character that then gets name-checked for something as horrible as Aurora.
My book came out the month before.
I'm sorry. That's rough. So yeah, we were. I guess we sort of had a moment there where we thought, okay, well, what are we really doing here, and how does this impact the concern of this book, or the import, or the tone even. So I think we sort of wanted to be sensitive to that, but we also felt, well, this also means that the book is important. You know, the fact that there hasn't been a sustained intellectual sort of discussion about this character yet, that's a hole, and it's a hole that we hope that we filled.
There is I don't know if this is true by research, but certainly Jerry Robinson claimed that it was on a Guardian survey, the newspaper The Guardian, that Joker is the #1 most known supervillain in popular culture. So I think publishing a book just on the Joker was sustainable, you know. And I hadn't seen books about supervillains, and that's what really excited me about this. And I had never been asked to write about a supervillain. I traditionally would do articles about heroes and critiquing heroes. And when I heard you were doing that, you said, oh, something like, you won't be interested in critiquing heroes. And I went, oh my gosh, that's my kryptonite, I have to try it.
It's funny that you describe the Joker as a supervillain, though, right? 'Cause very much like Batman, it's questionable whether or not he has actual power. But he still ranks up there above everyone else.
Yeah.
Like, people keep asking me, it's like, are you going to follow up with a book on the psychology of the Joker? And
I don't want to do that.
yeah, I don't want to. And I did say, because I had to talk about the Joker in there, but I did say the Joker defies diagnosis. We don't know what goes on inside his head, and it's best that way. The one thing I did go through was the insanity, and talk about whether or not he fit the criteria for insanity. You know, does he know what he's doing? Yeah. Does he know what's wrong? Yeah. That's what's fun about it. So in a lot of ways, he fits the legal criteria for being legally insane. No, legally sane. Although Steve Englehart wrote a story in which he wanted to show that on the face of it, the Joker was crazy. You know, when he tried to copyright fish, show he did not understand how the world worked. You know, he goes on, the clerk won't let him, he says you can't copyright fish. He's going in, threatening and killing people, trying to get them to let him copyright fish. Maybe that's insanity, but maybe it's failure to understand copyright law.
I make my students read that story in my superhero class when we do the villains, and their response to it is bewilderment, especially, today's students. So.
Now, your own thoughts about the Joker himself. What would you have to say about it? Like what you want to analyze with the Joker? What you think is the serious scholarly topic to talk about with the Joker?
Why is the Joker so potent, as Hannah said? Why is he the #1 villain? What is it that people find fascinating about him? And I guess the answer is that it's kind of unknowable in that sense. He's the wild card. He's the Joker, the trickster. But we, in all the iterations, whether it's in the 1950s where it's just kind of a prankster, or Cesar Romero's version, or a really dark version that Scott Snyder wrote, Steve Englehart's, the Madison's version. In fact, I think there's a story called Going Sane that the Madison wrote. All of those versions, from Heath Ledger to Jared Leto to Cesar Romero, they're all valid. And they're all the Joker. The Joker's just as likely to let you live as he is to kill you. Chances are, you don't want to go there, but you're going to die, but, he might let you off.
Yeah, and I think the thing that draws me in with the Joker is that he's potential. That anything is possible.
Will to power.
Yeah, I mean, you turn the page, or you push play or whatever, and if you're not already familiar with the story, you have no idea what's going to happen. Now there are some tropes and things that sort of come back, and there's some circular storytelling sometimes, but there really isn't a game plan that you can anticipate.
I think for me, the Joker is so popular because he tugs on a certain type of freedom we all secretly desire, but we won't admit it, right? Some of us dress up and go out in the middle of the night because we won't admit it, but the rest of us just go about our day. But there's a certain freedom there that is both scary and enticing at the same time.
And potentially empowering. One of the pieces in the book, who wrote a piece about Lady Gaga? Do you remember off the top of your head?
Oh,
Eric Garneau wrote a piece comparing the Joker to Lady Gaga.
It's a good piece.
It's a good piece.
That was an interesting comparison.
And it's the basic thrust is that those two characters, those two sort of social forces, come from a very similar place in terms of changeability and performance freedom. That is acting. So the piece is essentially, I guess, attempts to sort of rehabilitate the Joker a little bit as potentially a positive force in social terms.
Yeah, I mentioned Gaga in my book too. I was talking about Batman's enemies as celebrities of crime. They aren't just people who want to commit crime. They want to have fun in a really big, audacious, attention-seeking way. All right, audience, what is the best-known specific Joker story?
Killing Joke.
Killing Joke. Panelists, why is that the single best-known Joker story? Now, those of you who didn't work on it, let's hear your thoughts, and then we'll go to the guy who did. All right? Why is it?
Well, again, that's one that I make my students read, and I have to give them the trigger warning about it. And I've taught that book for the last 4 years. It's just a tremendously powerful story. People can relate to the Joker's failed attempts, but people can also be scared of what he does to Commissioner Gordon and Barbara. And students have a hard time with it. I've had students before not want to come when we have a discussion of the book because it's heavy material. Even though the book itself is not that explicit. It's all implied in many ways, which makes it worse because your mind is thinking about what Barbara went through, Commissioner Gordon, and those creepy little people that are in the book. that freaks students out. So we have some interesting discussions about what does all this mean? What is the perspective of the Joker? Are the stories even true? Is this an accurate representation of the Joker's life? You know, the whole multiple choice question. And one of the biggest things we debate is whether Batman actually kills the Joker at the end.
Yeah, I think it's the one bad day thing. You know, the idea that any of us can tip over, given the right set of circumstances. I think that's pretty resonant. And again, it sort of speaks to, on some level, that simultaneously the fear that we have of going there, but also, as Ryan pointed out, the potential joy of tipping over into that kind of radical freedom. And for me, the thing that always draws me on the book is whether we know it's accurate or not, the plausibility of that origin story. The way it's sort of rooted in a real world context instead of it being sort of fantastical has always been the thing that kind of made it one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Joker story.
I think from just a dramatic perspective, that's one of the most sustained stories where you're putting Batman and the Joker in a tight close-up together. The events where they're confronting each other seem to me, when I read it, to be going on forever and to be really sustained. You're looking at them both in relation to each other. And there's that one panel where they're sitting across the table from each other. I don't know if you remember this one panel, it's amazing. It looks like they're having dinner, it looks like they're a couple. And people criticize it at the time, oh, is that like, you know, is there homoerotic stuff going on in that panel? And I'm like, there's a lot more than that going on in that panel. You know, that is a really important panel. It's the honesty, how the undercurrent and the subtext is just brought out and put in the mouths of the characters. They're speaking about these realities of how these two characters relate to each other throughout their tradition. It's right, honest, and very real world, conversations. But I'll never forget just that panel and them sitting at the table together. Really meaningful.
I think for me, what's interesting about that is this sort of, like Rob mentioned, this sort of notion of radical freedom. A lot of times when we talk about freedom, it's always sort of like roses and puppies and kittens and happiness. And there's a certain element to this idea that freedom may in fact be complete chaos or madness, as the case may be. And you can see that play out as they sort of like slip away when they're talking to the Joker. And also this notion that maybe freedom, in a way, freedom as represented by the Joker is also contagious, right? Can you be infected by the Joker? Like just sort of his way of being. I always thought that was really interesting as well. So that's kind of what gets it for me.
When Alan first proposed the story to me and turned in the original outline, it was the definitive origin of the Joker, he said. And I said, that's wonderful. I don't think anyone has the right to do that, to make a definitive origin story. I think there are many characters in comics who are better served until less you know about them. And so I said, you can't make it definitive. It's a great story, but you got to fix that. And so he opens the thing with, sometimes they remember one way, sometimes another, just to clear the air. That this is a great story, but maybe it's all in his head. You never know. I've always been fascinated by the psychology, not so much of the Joker, though I adore writing him, but his henchmen. In their right mind, like literally we discussed this, wants to work for a guy who's as likely to kill you as he's to kill you, and yet he's always got henchmen around him. Someday I want to write that story. What makes you work for the Joker?
It's just a job here.
He's got a really good HR department.
Apparently he pays health insurance. It just goes really
Health
rough.
insurance is good because it goes to the heirs. Yeah, you're not going to be around.
I don't know if you want to go there, but I keep thinking about Harley Quinn because we're talking about the sanity of the Joker.
How many Harleys do we have in the room? Okay, see, that's all three. All right, we have 3 Harleys in the room.
Sane or not, and why would she be with someone the most well-known hench person even. And the question is, how does all this about the Joker that we find out about the Joker help us interpret her?
Yeah, I didn't have to do that when I was going through analyzing Harley. I was going through some possible diagnoses. And one of them kind of depended on his diagnosis.
Yeah.
Shared psychosis. But did he really have a psychosis for her to share? And was she a social chameleon? Well, when she hangs out with heroes, she's more heroic. When she hangs out with villains, she's more villainous. When she hangs out with Mr. Jake, she's more murderous. So she definitely fits that. That's not a disorder in and of itself, but it's definitely part of her personality. I mean, she's a tricky one.
I think it's interesting, though, if we talk about the Joker as being freedom, and then Harley Quinn also being sort of having like a very sort of feminist empowerment element to her. And so
at least pre-52.
Right. And so by being with the Joker, she becomes more free from the archetypes of where she came from. I think it could be an interesting discussion also.
Yeah, the Mad Love version of her origin, she's an agent, even though she's being fooled by the Joker on something, she's the agent of her own change into villain. She is the one who decides, I'm taking on this costume, I'm breaking him out of Arkham, I'm making these things happen. Right? I think that is part of what some see on the feminist view. Oh, most of the comic book stories with Harley are when she's not with him. She's more interesting when she's not hanging around him, when she's trying to be independent, even when Catwoman and Ivy are skeptical about her really breaking away from him. And we can go well on why she's popular, because we're making this today. You have a last thought before we ask our audience questions?
What's your view of The Killing Joke, Dr. Langley?
It's an incredibly well-told story. I had my students read it. I taught a psychology and literature course right before I came to my first Comic-Con. And I gave students assignments to analyze characters. And we did a number of we read Hamlet, we read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But I had to read The Killing Joke because it's a really well-constructed story. It's powerful, and you can think, you can overthink. Like when you refer to the Lord of the Underworld, there are some very strong visual elements in there, with a Lord of the Underworld look to it. And so there are a lot of things to analyze. Even the colors, the original colors, not when they became a bit more glaring in their re-release. The original, the tones on that, very, very strong storytelling, fascinating look at the characters. Not for a minute did I accept that as the Joker's real background, but when he got to the multiple choice things, like, okay, it's good. It worked. That's what's in his head right now. It's part of what's motivating him in this story. Again, in the movie The Dark Knight, when the Joker first tells the story about how he's got the scars, it kind of bothered me because we don't need to know his background. Then he tells a completely incompatible one. It's like, all right, now it's the multiple choice line from The Killing Joke. And then he has the third one where he's about to tell his third lie. And Batman, I got these scars. Batman, nobody know how you got these. And we kind of pulled for Batman for not buying him the lie. But we kind of wanted to know what that third lie was going to be. All right, questions, comments, insults? Yes, sir.
Actually, incidentally, Nietzsche's Zarathustra doesn't have an origin either. He just comes out of the mountains one day.
Okay, yes.
So what do you think are some of the most important evolutions that the Joker has gone through throughout his entire existence and in different media?
Well, the reason I chose the particular book that I did for contribution to this book, I chose the Arkham Asylum comic by David Kidd and Grant Morrison because I personally think things really spun out differently after that. That book directly addresses the sanity of the Joker. It's about being insane. And it also gave us this great foundation for Arkham Asylum being a thing to think about. And now we have all these games and stuff. Like, I think that was the beginning of the psychiatric approach maybe to the Joker. Am I wrong? It was 25 years ago, 27 years ago now.
The early 70s when Denny O'Neil wanted the Joker to start killing again. And Neil Adams was kind of reluctant to do it. Denny said, well, he's insane. And Neil said, okay, if he's insane, then we're going to. Before that, there had been a story in the late 50s. It was the Joker faked insanity, faked hebephrenia, which was misspelled in the story, so that he could get into a mental asylum in order to escape more easily. So he was viewed as sane at that point in his history, no matter how outlandish he was. But then, you know, when Denny brings him back 73-ish, that from then on he was viewed as insane. He still had more layers and permutations. Do you have something you were going to say a second ago, Lynn? Or I made you forget what you were going to say.
No, it's very weird, that whole Arkham Asylum. I was editing several years before a book called Who's Who, which was the encyclopedia of all the DC characters, major places. And I had one rule for all of the other writers who were working on the project, which is you add nothing. All you're allowed to put in is information you already know in the books. But I was the editor, and I was editing a number of those titles and writing some of them, so I cheated. I gave Arcane a first name for the very first time in the encyclopedia, and I sat down one afternoon and wrote the entire origin of Arkham Asylum. All these in, I don't know, 40 foot, it was completely off the top of my head. And I got paid my page rate for the one page I had done. And then 5 years later, Brad takes it, it's the graphic novel, and makes a fortune off of it. But all of this stuff actually comes from me initially.
Wait, you can't stop there. What did you think of when you thought of Arkham Asylum? What did you want to do?
I thought it was a black place from the moment it was made. This was never going to be a place of curative capability. You go in nuts, you come out nutser. It's just that, and I told the story of Amadeus Arkham, who founded the place. You know, there is stuff to be read between the lines in certain places in that one-page origin. And I think that's part of the fun of it, is to go, oh my God.
Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah, people often praise your brilliance for that. They just mistakenly say Grant when they're phrasing it. In terms of the most important evolution, every Joker is the ones we really think of. They're right for the story and the time. That is part of what is so amazing about this character, is how adaptable he is. The Riddler doesn't have that kind of range. And I love the Riddler, but he doesn't have that kind of range. There's a more specific kind of stories you have to tell with him, or you're making up a different character. The Joker, they can all be the Joker. The Joker loves his face. He puts it on everything. And yet, when he cuts off his own face, nobody goes, oh, come on, that's too crazy for the Joker to do it. So they all work. When people ask who's your favorite Joker, it's like you can't mix and match them. You can't put Heath Ledger in the 66. You can't put Cesar Romero, in Suicide Squad, I assume. All right, someone else. Yes.
Those exponential nuances that you see in the Joker, do you think they're reflective of the Batman that we have as well? Like you said, we can't see Caesar in Suicide Squad. I don't know how much Batman's going to be in Suicide Squad, but do you think that Batman has a huge impact on the Joker? Because one of the most common backstories we need is it's Batman that created the Joker.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things for me about Suicide Squad is going to be just how much Batman there is. And if there isn't much, what the Joker looks like in that context. Because it's always about that duality, right? And so where does that character go if that duality is, at least in this story, not as prominent? I think is a really interesting thing to look at. And then I'm also interested to see how the Harley Joker duality plays out in the film as well too, because the marketing material seems to suggest that there's much more Harley's movie than the Joker's.
Yeah, from what we know of the movie, what we see of Batman in it is from the perspective of the villains. And so that will reflect them. How they see him is going to reflect them. But yeah, each Batman changes over time. The Adam West Batman is the one who got the Cesar Romero Joker, and so on throughout the history. I think you could more easily, maybe mix Michael Keaton and Christian Bale than you could Jack Nicholson and Heath Ledger. Yeah. That's my own thought. Okay, we go to the back. Yes, you. Yes.
I was wondering, you said earlier that Batman kind of resembled the devil a little bit in the way his actions, like in the shadows, and his look and everything. My question would be would any of the villains necessarily exist solely on their own within Batman's world without Batman? Like, he's like the puppet master. And sort of like, would they have really taken on their own individual roles necessarily without him, if he was no longer?
Gotham, the TV series, says that they all come out of their own idiosyncrasies, because there is no Batman yet for them. But I think there's a line from Gordon that in one of the movies I watched that says basically, you showed up and they all raised their level of criminalness just to match. And I think personally he's responsible for the vast majority of that scale. You know, he created his own nemesis.
I think the Gotham TV show is exploring whatever was there before, which was pretty extreme. It's still going to look like he galvanized it into its current state.
I don't know. I think Gotham is making the city so weird. It's going to be no big deal when a guy shows up dressed like a Batman.
I'm with you. But it brings an interesting point that it's all about the villains. You know, Suicide Squad, even Captain America: Civil War, the villains, the heroes as villains, and Gotham's called Rise of the Villains.
Yeah, I mean, there's that wonderful line in the first Michael Keaton Batman movie where Nicholson's sitting at the desk reading the paper and goes, "When Bat terrorizes the city, when do they get a load of me?"
Of course, all these characters were going to be horrible human beings anyway. They just might have not have done it with as much style.
Yeah, exactly. Style.
All right, in the back, yes.
You can choose any actor to be the Joker.
Michael Keaton.
Tom Huddleston.
He's under contract though. Christian Bale.
That would be an interesting one.
Okay.
As far as the movies are concerned, with the Joker that's been in the 60s film, first Batman 89, Heath Ledger, now Jared Leto. Even though the film hasn't come out yet, the Suicide Squad, who are your favourite Jokers?
Yeah, to me that is like saying, who's your favorite kid? It has to do with the story. I don't have a favorite. It's which from the stories.
For me, if you accept the Nietzschean archetype or the Nietzschean argument, it's Heath Ledger, because he's very much this sort of like radically free, and that's what I love about the fact that he tells that origin story like multiple times, because he doesn't have one, so he doesn't care. He doesn't really care what happens. He doesn't care what happened before. He doesn't care what happens afterwards. He just is. He's just a force of nature, or a will to power, is what Nietzsche would describe him as. So I think it's Heath Ledger for me. And the way they set him up in that movie, where it starts out with the very beginning when there's no sound at all, and you're sort of like, you're getting amped up for what's about to happen. And then you're like, oh, it's a bank robbery, and then he murders everyone.
I think for me it's a tie. It's Ledger who is brilliant in the role. And has the moment I realized when he is totally identified. When he's still at the fire engine and he's driving down the street, and he's out the window and his tongue lolling, and I realized he's a mad dog. Exactly, right, John. And the other one, weirdly enough, is Mark Hamill.
Yeah.
Yeah, you talked about the Joker embodying like freedom, but considering how kind of dependent he is on Batman, particularly in the most iconic versions, like even in his Killing Joke and The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Returns, he's always trying to prove a point to Batman. Like most of his actions are by that. Is he really free?
Yeah, he is, because the real characteristic of, or the three characteristics of Nietzsche that you mentioned, the will to power, the love of faith, and eternal recurrence, or self-overcoming. And since the Joker can't get Batman to commit, he's hung up on it. Like, he cannot overcome himself until he can get Batman to admit what Batman is. And so that's why that's why this cycle just goes and goes and goes. Because his will to power is in convincing Batman to stop being such a wuss. And since Batman won't do it, he's the immovable object, like he says, like they say in The Dark Knight. Since he's the immovable object, he has to keep coming back to it. And so he changes his game every time, right? He has the fish, he turns into a computer virus at one point. At some point he joined the UN, which that's actually kind of one of my favorites.
Yeah, he was the ambassador.
He was the
Iran.
That's fantastic. And so he has to keep coming back to it. And so he's driven by a different force in this relationship. It's just like they described the unstoppable force meets the immovable object. The Joker is pure will to power. That's all he is. And so he keeps driving for it every time, and Batman just won't give it up. And so he has to keep coming back to it.
If you were guaranteed to get caught up in a Joker scheme, which Joker would you prefer?
Cesar Romero.
Yeah, that's unanimous.
That's not it over here. I'm trying to make sure I'm not leaving any part of the room out.
In the same way that the Joker might need Batman, do you think that it works the other way, where Batman somewhat needs the Joker, even if he's not aware of it?
The Joker sure thinks Batman does.
Batman does, because the Joker is Batman's manifestation of his own frustrations. And so he needs it, right? He needs this outlet, because he can't admit to himself who he really is, so he needs this outlet of the Joker. And so that yeah, he does.
No, he doesn't.
It's critical. It's critical to his definition of self. Like, he's so frustrated, but he can't admit it, so he reaches out to these other characters.
Well, yeah, I think because basically they're the only ones who provide a real challenge.
Yeah.
He needs somebody as good as he is to fight. You know, it's embarrassing pitting against, Muggsy Malone in a suit. There's no competition. You need somebody every bit as off as he is.
Yeah, one of my views on that is he's going to be Batman whether there's a Joker or not. If the Joker somehow goes away forever, he'll still be Batman. If Batman goes away forever, Joker goes into a comatose-like state until he shows up again and the Dark Knight Returns. So the Joker needs Batman a lot more than Batman does the Joker in that regard. And in terms of his ability and challenge, just like you want somebody to challenge you, yes. But he's going to be Batman no matter what. We're both right.
The Suicide Squad film is making history in terms of studying the Joker, because this will be the longest sustained presentation of the Joker, absent of Batman. Even the Batman's in the film, guaranteed they aren't the same scene all that much of the film. So we're going to see the Joker out of that context a lot more than we ever have before, I think.
I hope.
That should be interesting.
Last question.
So, with all these films and with the love of the Joker that you see everywhere and films that are focusing on the villains, what is it about us that likes villains?
We're rotten.
Freedom. You
Freedom, yeah.
You secretly want to be free.
I mean, there's the old, idea that the hero is made by the villains, then he fights, and you have to come up with extraordinary villains to keep things interesting, and that villains are active and heroes are reactive.
I think there's a sense of, again, in the West, maybe post 9/11, of disorder, of danger, of being vulnerable, that I think our entertainment culture has started to tap into in a number of different ways, whether it's through the trope of the supervillain or through the anti-hero, the Walter Whites and the Frank Underwoods, for example. If you look at the Comic-Con schedule, there's probably, I think, a half a dozen panels or presentations on villains or anti-heroes or baddies. It's happening. It's something that we're preoccupied with right now. I do think it has something to do with sort of our sense of the geopolitical instability and so forth, particularly in comparison to decades past.
I think we're very afraid of the status quo right now, and we're afraid of dominant power without questioning it. And this is the main way we can look at questioning it in a helpful way, because we will decide whether the Joker is right or wrong in any given situation, and that will affect how we view power, the structure of the law, and whatever we previously.
All right, we can keep going on that question along, but it is time. So, Where can everybody find you here or online? I guess we'll start with me and go down. I'm on 6 panels. I'm at Super Horologist on Twitter. Where can they find you here or online?
Texas Tech University by my name. That's about it.
I'm up to my ears in panels and signings all weekend. Just check the program, you'll find it. I'll be signing at my own table, which is HH06, whenever I can get away from being in other places. And I'm introducing a new project this weekend. We're doing a major panel on Saturday. I'm got the best gig of my entire career. I just got hired to create a new universe for Neil deGrasse Tyson. And it's called Space Odyssey at the moment. And if you go over to the Hilton Gas Lab, we have a whole showroom display of the stuff they're starting to do.
I'm on Twitter at Hannah Menzies, and I have a Facebook author page. At the convention, I'm at the Dark Horse booth a lot. I'm also hosting the Dark Horse Originals panel, which will have David Kino panel, and that is on Friday. And I'm also at Travis's panel on Sunday.
We'll talk about Batman again on Sunday.
Yeah, we're doing Batman.
Well, Rob and I, you can find both of us again through Texas Tech University. I think for all three of us, it's our first name dot last name at ttu.edu. And the other thing that I guess we could mention is that Rob and I's next project for a book, an edited book, is a supervillains reader that we're going to be putting together for the University of Mississippi Press. So we're under contract for that. The call for papers, if any of you are scholars, authors, etc., out there, is forthcoming in days. And that's on tap for, I guess, so we're supposed to deliver next summer. So it'll be that fall or winter. So keep your eyes open for that. Speaking of villains being prominent.
Yeah, and you can find us on Facebook. Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you.